budget is ultimately all about taxes, but this particular budget, experts are faced with a dilemma. Will it be a vote on account and therefore perhaps nothing at all in terms of taxes? Or will it be a pre-election budget and therefore have a lot of populist measures in terms of taxes, sir? As well, are there any urgent steps that have to be announced because of, grandfathering and other deadlines that you must expect from this interim budget, or call it vote on account? Joining me to discuss all that is Sudhir, Kapadia, partner at EY, and Dinesh, Kanabar, the CEO and Managing Director of Dhruva Advisors. Gentlemen, thank you very much for your time. Mr. Kapadia, first to you. I think the one that is unmissable is the one that expires, that 15% corporate taxes for new manufacturing units. That expires March 24. Are you expecting an extension?
Yeah, absolutely, because along with the PLI scheme, as we know, Latha, there is a lot of encouragement by government, not only for the announced PLIs, but more and more sectors are being thought about for the right reasons. Again, as a signal for attracting more both domestic and foreign direct investment in capital projects, I think it is imperative for government to extend this new manufacturing unit scheme with a lower rate of 15% along with the PLI. And therefore, a one-year extension is certainly expected. I would hope that at least a policy announcement is made to give more certainty and stability to this new tax regime, and just make a policy statement to say that this will be the rate for the next 2 to 3 years. But that could be a policy statement, but certainly an extension of a year.
Okay. Well, Mr. Kanabar, good morning. A similar question to you. Is this something that one should expect? I mean, one hears a lot of counter arguments that already corporates get a far better deal than do individuals. And secondly, tax is hardly the reason why people manufacture or don't manufacture in India. There are a whole host of other reasons. So do you think this merits a push?
So this policy was brought in 2019 when the Prime Minister had gone to USA. He met up with several of the industrialists there, encouraged them to come down to India and promised them a very simple tax regime. And that's where this was introduced. It has been pushed back because of COVID. But the point that I was hoping the Finance Minister will agree to is that we are making ourselves as a credible counter to China. And we want people to relocate their manufacturing bases, or at least make it China plus one, Europe plus one, whatever you like to call it. And the point is that unless you are able to give a stable regime, that is not going to happen. I agree with you that nobody is coming to India only for taxes. But taxes do play a very, very important role, Latha, without an element of doubt. And this 15% regime has seen a huge amount of investment. And I would actually want the government to make a policy statement to say that we are extending it for a period of 5 years, not because of COVID or whatever else, but because we are pitching to say that as opposed to Vietnam and everybody else against whom we are competing on this front, we are very attractive.
Okay. Okay, well, let's see if that is even extended by 1 year, and a more, relaxed decision, policy decision, as you call it, is postponed to the June budget. That's pretty much possible. The big debates are taken there. But, my producers are flashing only the personal income tax numbers. So let me get to that, because I think that's what they want to hear. Mr. Kapadia, first, do you expect any changes in this usual debt mutual fund and equity mutual fund, long-term, short-term, indexation, anything at all that will be tinkered? We got this huge heart attack last time with the indexation and debt fund benefits being taken away.
Yeah, but the patient has survived and thrived after that heart attack. So I don't personally think that in the interim budget, there will be much change in or overall of the capital gains tax regime. There is a need for an overall to rationalize a lot of the holding period provisions, etc., especially vis-a-vis equity and real estate, etc. But I don't think this will be the time. As you rightly pointed out, the overall of the debt mutual fund taxation has already been put in place. The arbitrage which was available vis-a-vis bank fixed deposits has now been largely removed. So I don't expect any major changes in the capital gains tax side as far as the interim budget is concerned. As I mentioned, there is a scope for aligning the holding periods for long-term assets like real estate and equity shares, but perhaps a more comprehensive review in the full-fledged budget in July would be the right opportunity for the government.
Okay. Fair enough. Okay, now my producers want us to talk about personal income tax, standard deductions, etc. Well, so Mr. Kanabar, first, if you want to add to anything on mutual funds, and I mean, do you have different expectations? But more importantly, personal income tax.
No, I don't have different expectations. And Latha, this is going to be a vote on account. There's only one thing which could potentially happen. So we have the new tax regime and the old tax regime for individuals. And while on the corporate side, almost 80-90% of the corporates have moved to the new tax regime. In the individual side, the percentage is very minimal. And therefore, I would not be surprised if there are some things which are done to make the new tax regime more attractive to individuals, like pushing up the taxable taxation slab rates, exemption slab rate, such that people are incentivized more and more to go towards the new tax regime. As to whether that will happen on a interim budget or later on, I don't know, but I would not be surprised if it happens, because to some extent it would be a bit of a populist move, and maybe deservedly so, because that's something which is what is expected by people who like to move to the new tax regime. And coming to the other point which you made, debt mutual funds have survived, so have insurance policies survived. So I think changes have happened. We have sort of brought about a bit of stability. Coming to a rationalization of the period, the least period is a 12-month being regarded as long-term for equity markets, listed equity shares. And I don't think the government will want to tinker. The market is doing very, very well. The market is booming, and I don't think government wants to do anything. If at all, I think this is a time for government to seriously think about disinvestment, because that's something where PSU stocks have rallied over the last 1 year. Given that situation, it is just important that the government takes advantage of it and is able to push the disinvestment agenda further. I see you flashing whether ATC will be increased, whether others will be increased. I don't think those are what's going to happen in the interim budget. That will have to wait for the final budget.
Okay, no, but I'll tell you where this desire springs from. Of course, eternally it springs from a desire not to give away the money you've earned. But more importantly, Mr. Kapadia, the chief economic advisor, the past and the present have argued that the past has argued that PM Kisan Samman Nidhi could be raised from 6,000 to 8,000 rupees per farm family, because it has to be indexed to inflation. 2019, 6,000 rupees doesn't buy the same thing today. By that logic, income tax also deserves a look in, doesn't it? Do you think? And again, pre-election. So, lowest slab, any reliefs you expect?
So you saw that in 2019 interim budget. There was an increase in 87A rebate, for example. Also increase in the deduction for self-occupied housing from one house to two. So definitely the government has the opportunity to give relief on personal tax if they want to. Just 2 points there. In my personal view, the government would now look to making the new scheme more and more attractive and will not have a mission creep of coming back with deductions in the new scheme. So it's much simpler to increase the standard deduction from 50,000 to, let's say, 1 lakh. And that would be a proxy for whatever other deductions, are not available under the new scheme. Okay. And secondly, you have the 10% rate kicking in at 9 lakhs annual income. That can be tinkered with and made 10 lakhs in the interim budget, for example. So I think the focus will be to make the new scheme, the CTR, more and more attractive and not have unnecessarily an increase in the deduction regime, which we want to move away from.
No, absolutely. That spares us a lot of trouble as well. In any case, these days, it's so easy to fill up an income tax form. Mr. Kanabar, any thoughts on this itself? Housing. There is always an attraction, a desire. You think they'll tinker and give us any more benefits on housing at all? And then let's move to the other corporate issue. the MNC's taxes. That also is something which some people argue, the significant economic presence rules. Anything on those esoteric lines that may be changed?
So one item, coming to the corporate side first, which is what people are eagerly looking forward to, is how does India react to the OECD changes which have been brought about on Pillar 1 and Pillar 2. Most countries have already started putting domestic laws, and how do we react to them is something which people are waiting to see. It is something which is potentially a revenue generating item, etc. I would not be surprised if this is brought about. The only thing which sort of I hesitate to say it ought to come in this interim budget is that government may actually want to wait for the final budget. But given the fact that India is one of the signatories to the OECD Charter, one of those 123 countries who have signed it, and a lot of countries have already come about with their domestic law, India ought to do so sooner rather than later. As to whether it will happen in this interim budget or in the final budget remains to be seen. I would not be surprised if the government waits for the final budget, but this is something which is imperative and ought to happen. On the housing front, Latha, after a lot of time, maybe about a lull of about 7-8 years, the housing and the entire real estate sector has revived, is doing very, very well. The only thing that the government can do is to increase the interest deduction for second home. And I don't know whether, given the fact that the industry itself is doing well, the government needs to give a further incentive to individuals to make those investments. We are seeing how large houses transactions have happened. You're seeing newspaper reports on how sizes of the houses are going up, etc. And I don't know whether the government will have that incentive to provide that higher interest deduction, because people are, as it is, prospering in the housing regime at this point of time.
I agree with you. I agree with you. Optically, it is premium housing that's doing far better than affordable housing. So a tax benefit need not necessarily be a big populist clincher. Just final yes and no from both of you. Income tax, ultimately, it will be an election. So, Sudhir, Kapadia, anything we should expect at all? This year, income tax has given the government a 35% growth in kitty in the first 8-9 months that data is available. They could give away something. Do you think they will?
Sorry, Latha, I was actually going to just point out that if you see the share of personal income tax in the total tax kitty, today it stands at 50%, 50. It used to be just under a decade ago, only 40%. So government has done very well on the personal income tax front. Mind you, that personal income tax is not just salary taxation on salaried income alone. It includes all non-corporate tax sources. Yeah. So to your point, can they afford to give away? But, we have to keep in mind the FRBM. We are still far, far away from the FRBM target of 3%. Even the last year's budget has put a glide path of only 4.5% for the next year for fiscal deficit. And therefore, I don't think the fiscal space is necessarily very easy for the government, to be fair. So at the lower slabs, yes, but I don't think anything much can be given away at the higher slabs.
No, that's a fair point. The government has commitments elsewhere. And then if this Kisan Samman Nidhi is also increased, there are also other expenses to be borne. Fair point. So we're not going into this budget with very high expectations on the income tax front. Anything that comes will be very positive, especially for consumption stocks. So note that, Mr. Kanabar and Sudhir Kapadia, we will be inviting you, of course, on budget day itself. And we will take a rain check on how things pan out. Thank you very much for joining us with your budget expectations. Wrap up on this special show, Chartbusters Update.